I have a bunch of unusual stories to share with you, and I hope you'll entertain me. I have an unusual life in that I make a living writing books, which is a increasingly hard profession to pull off these days. How many of you bought an actual physical book in the last month? Physical? Wow, I see not that. Maybe a third of you. That's not too bad. How about a book at all? Hey, books, paper. Who wants any of that stuff? But anyway, I have an unusual lifestyle. I make a living writing books, and mostly what I write about these days is about ideas and how ideas work and what goes on in people's minds and in organizations and in teams in converting ideas into things. And it's something I've been studying for a long time. And the reason why I'm here is I wrote a book about it called The Myths of Innovation that took all this history and all this stuff about how people who are famous for being great thinkers and for making great inventions and great discoveries, how they actually pulled that off as opposed to how we think they did. And that's why I'm in front of you today. And what I wanted to share with you was some perspective on ideas and how they work. And the word innovation has come up a few times already this morning. I've seen it on some of the posters that are here. And my job for the next 15 minutes is to give you a broad view about innovation. I don't actually work on vaccines. I have used vaccines, so I'm a fan. Vaccines are good. That's why I'm here. So I'm pro-vaccine, but I'm not an expert on it. And I think my job for you as the opening speakers is to lay out a big landscape so there's plenty of room for us all the other speakers and all of you who are here to think about innovation from the broadest lens possible. And the first thing I want to talk about was this word innovation. It's become a very trendy word. It's been used more in the last decade than probably the last 50 years before that in terms of how often it's used in books and in media and in news reporting. And I think that's a bad thing. I'm really not a fan of the word. But one thing I can say is most of the uses of the word today in the tech sector, people who are fans of Apple and iPods and gadgetry, that the word innovation is often used about progress in convenience, things that we've now made easier to do that we could already pretty much do before. And the framework that I've been invited into today is a much more noble one, that when you're talking about making things better in terms of making people live longer, or giving people a product or a thing that allows them to live at all, or saves their children or their families from misery or suffering, that's a noble idea. That's a much more noble use of the word than what commonly gets practiced. And just being invited here at all has been a refresher for me and a reminder for me about that context. Now, many of you work in this industry, you work in healthcare, you may be so used to the world that you're in that you forget how important it is what you do. And I'm an outsider here. I spent a lot of time at Google and Yahoo and Microsoft, and when they use that word, I'm annoyed by it, but now I'm even more annoyed by it in the context of being around and having researched and studied what you guys do. So I wanted to open with that and remind you that how important what you guys do is and how much more noble it is than a lot of what gets thrown around about innovation and breakthroughs and game-changing discoveries. Now, related to that, I've developed a very negative. People ask me all the time, okay, you studied this stuff, you studied ideas, and great, what should we do? What should we do differently? We want to have more ideas, we want to have better ideas, we want more of our good ideas to make it out to our customers. What should we do? And I'm invited into places, and I'm asked to observe and give feedback. And one of the first things that I tell people is just not to use the word. Don't use the word innovation. And they go, why? It's a fun word to say. People like it. We put it in our marketing, and they respond to it. Who doesn't want to be an innovator? And then I start to bring up names of people who I've studied. And there's nothing particularly amazing about these people relative to other inventors. I mean, the people who are listed here, some of them you may know. Einstein's kind of hard not to know. That's Marie Curie in the upper right. The upper left corner is Doug Engelbart, who's credited as being the inventor of the computer mouse. It's kind of interesting that he's not a household name, really, given how important his invention is for all the technologies that are called innovative later on. The other three, I bet you probably know. But the interesting fact about these people, and this is true for most people who are credited with being the great breakthrough, radical revolutionaries in their fields, is they didn't use the word innovation very much. In some cases, they didn't use it at all. And if you read the journals and the lab notes and the actual artifacts of people who are known to be great thinkers about their work while they were doing it, before they became famous for those ideas, most of the language they use is very simple. It's very simple language. It's words like problem, hypothesis, experiment, observation, prototype, hack, hunch. Very simple, ordinary human language. And it's only after the fact, when people like me, writers and historians come along later, that we like to focus on things that seem exceptional, things that seem radical, because that's the only way we can validate for ourselves how they're able to pull off these things. So the first thing I say is, if you want to actually be inventive, you want to be creative, you want to have a better chance at developing good ideas, I say simplify your language. Whenever you hear the word innovation in a conversation, where it's not about marketing, I'm not saying that you should never use the word in marketing or whatever, because that has a certain appeal. But if you're actually in the room when you're supposed to be working on ideas, you want to have as simple language as possible. And so then people go, okay, fine, Scott, when we hear the word innovation, what should we use instead? And the best possible definition I have found, this is not my definition, don't remember where I found it, but the best possible definition I've found are these three words: significant positive change. Whenever anyone says innovation, significant positive change is the best possible search and replace you could ever do. Why? Well, innovation is this abstract term. We think of geniuses and amazing ideas, and it's filled with all this romance. And it's abstract romance. But you convert it to this language, and now you can have an actual practical conversation about what you're trying to do. Okay, change. What is it you want to change? What's the thing you want to make better? You want to make customer satisfaction go up? You want more profit? Do you want to improve life expectancy? What is the variable you want to change? If you don't know what that is, then no matter how much money you get or resources you have, it's not going to matter, because you're not going to know where to put it. So what do you want to change? And thing number two, what does it mean to be positive? What is a positive change in that sense? Does you want the number to go up, number to go down? And the third piece is significant. If you're going to call something an innovation, that means it's a significant improvement you're making. If you make something, I don't know, 0.0001% better, it's really not a significant change. Although, in some cases, maybe it is. Maybe the thing you're trying to solve is so difficult and so hard that that is significant. But shouldn't you have a conversation about what a significant change is? So often in the world, in the business world, in the tech sector, which is more of my home turf, the word innovation gets thrown around without anyone ever asking any of these questions. So there's 10 people in the room, there's 10 different ideas about what innovation means, 10 different problems everyone wants to solve, and it's no surprise that no good ideas ever come out of those conversations. So if you leave nothing else I say interests you, and you're bored already, I have about 10 minutes more to go, but if you're bored already, that's the advice I can give you. You will not find a famous person in the history of all this stuff who used the word innovation as much as most people do today. The third point I want to offer you has to do with teams. And most disciplines that are focused on science or engineering or technology, the people who study those fields and become experts in those fields have a view of the world, or a tendency to view the world on certain terms. They like science and math and engineering because there's a certainty about it. There's a certainty about the repeatability of those things. Software developers like computers because of how predictable they are. They always give you the same response. When it comes to people, many software developers and engineers and scientists don't like working with people as much. They don't always give you the same answer to a question. They don't always work in predictable ways. But the truth of the matter is, most great ideas, in fact, I'll go stronger, all ideas are based on other ideas that came from other people. You won't find a single idea in the history of science or technology that isn't based on ideas that came from someone else. And often, many of those great breakthroughs were based on collaborations, many people working together. So there's an inherent problem that we have, or a mismatch, of the goals that everyone has about ideas and developing ideas, and this romance we have about there being lone inventors who sat in a room for hours on their own and just concentrated, and then boom, they had the idea, and then they were famous. That's this mythology that we have. It's repeated to us again and again in films and movies and fairy tales. And some of us really do want that to happen for us. But the history doesn't bear that out very well. It almost never takes place. And so my point is, why don't more companies and more groups and more teams have breakthrough ideas? It's often because they haven't figured out yet how dependent they are on each other for those good ideas to develop. It's not something that's rewarded very much, building a good team or growing a team. It takes a lot of time as a manager or a leader to create the kind of environment where a good team can grow. It's a nurturing kind of process. And it has nothing to do with how many degrees you have or how many patents you have. It's a completely other way of looking at the world to say, how do we create an environment such that people with a good idea want to share it with their partner because they know it's going to make their ideas better? How do you create that kind of environment? Now, I only have a few minutes. I can't give you the answer to that. But I can tell you it starts by recognizing that's probably the largest problem you have. If you've hired well, you have talented people, great. Now your problem is this one. How do you make an environment so people are rewarded and are happy and motivated and passionate about collaborating with each other? Now, related to this is the notion of risk. And I've studied the history of the scientific method and hypothesis testing and experimentation. So I know something about it. I'm not an expert on it, but I know something about it. And there's this notion about experiments that I think is somewhat broken. So an experiment, as I experienced it in school, certainly in high school and elementary school, an experiment meant there was this thing that my teacher had done 1,000 times before that he kind of was really bored by. And we knew we were in a lab, but we were being treated like kids, so they gave us a 20-step instruction sheet. We're going to do it, and at some point, something very predictable to everyone would happen. And we're supposed to write it down. They're usually you put the phosphorus in and it blows up, poof, and you go and you write it down. Oh, it blew up, great. Now, that's not really an experiment. That's something where the outcome is known before you begin. Now, an experiment should mean that there's some possibility that something unexpected will happen. There's some possibility something unexpected will happen. And when something unexpected happens, that there's interest in seeking out why it happened. There's something new there that's been learned. That's part of the goal of an experiment. It's not the only goal, but it's part of the goal. And so I love this little picture. I don't know how many of you are YouTube fanatics like I am and know what this is a picture of. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? What's going on here? The Mentos. Who here knows about the Mentos thing? For those of you who don't, you should be ashamed of yourselves. This is like the greatest breakthrough in the history of Diet Coke and candy. Basically, you take a Mentos, this little candy with the stupid commercials, if you put it in a Diet Coke canister, there's something about the surface area and the sugar in the candy and the carbonation of the beverage that makes it basically explode. It's amazing. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. But the reactions on these kids' faces to me, like there's an experiment that took place. There's a diversity of reactions. Something surprising took place. Now, some of the kids here are excited. Some are scared. Some are bored. There's a diversity of responses. That's an indicator that some kind of risk or some kind of unexpected thing took place. And if you're doing experiments, you can use that word to do very, very safe things. I'm experimenting. But really, you're doing things that are very predictable to you. And every once in a while, you have to start asking this question, where are we going to do the things and do the odd, strange things that may be unusual, things that have some probability of giving us an unusual result? When does that happen? And I'm much more of a pragmatic, down-to-earth kind of guy. So whenever I've managed a team of developers or engineers, the thing I'm always asking is, or periodically I'm asking is, like, who's the crazy guy on my team? He might not be the smartest guy on my team. He might not be the most qualified guy on my team. But he's the guy who at 2 in the morning has some crazy idea and just goes and tries it out. Who's that guy? And what am I doing as a manager to make sure that once a month, maybe, I don't know, once every couple of weeks, he's doing a crazy thing? That's my job if I'm the manager. I want to make sure he knows that. I don't want him always doing crazy stuff. That'd be a little scary, right? Depending on what kind of lab you work in and what kind of gear is involved, that could be very dangerous, right? But I want to make sure there's some guy or girl, I don't mean to be gender specific here, there's some person in my organization that I know is that person, and I'm fueling that. And I'm fueling it so that periodically something happens where my team and my group and my department or my company is forced to respond to something because it's unusual, it's unexpected, it's different. Something happens, there's an idea that divides people. It gets them passionate about something, forces them to have an opinion about something. If that doesn't happen, then not a whole lot of innovation is likely to take place because everything we're doing is predictable. Everything's following the same line of thinking of all the people who came before us. That can't lead to something new. You have to be exploring. Experimentation and exploration are very parallel concepts. Explorers used to look at the map and go, well, we've covered all this territory. Let's go to the part no one's gone to before. All right. I mean, that's kind of crazy in a way. That's what you want. You want to find a new idea, a new way of looking at things that's not going to happen all on its own. Now, to bring this back around to history, which is sort of my wheelhouse, and science, which is an interest of mine, I'm a big fan of reading first-person accounts of breakthroughs. They're very different from the media, movie, mythologies of how things happen. I want to know what the person was thinking about the idea as they were working on it. Because if I'm going to work on an idea, that's what it's going to feel like. It's not going to feel like what I see them after they become famous. I want to know, what were they thinking 6 months before they found that they made the discovery? When they were working every day, what were they thinking? What was their pattern? What can I copy? What can I avoid? And so one of my favorite books to refer to is this book. It's by Crick and Watson, two of the discoverers of DNA. It's a short book, and it's a favorite reference of mine for one reason. The book is an entirely human story. At least for me, it's a human story. And the story goes something like this. We had a crazy idea that most of the world didn't believe in. In fact, much of the scientific community didn't believe in, but we believed in it. So we did an experiment, didn't work. We had a hunch based on the data we got from that experiment. That didn't work either, but that led us to another experiment that we tried. We got a little closer, and on and on and on it goes. It's a very human, intuitive-centric story. And there's a lesson there for me anyway, someone who doesn't have the background that many of you do in science, about how when you're doing breakthrough science, there's that need to trust your intuition. There's that need to follow it to places where you can't necessarily prove that you're right, but you're trying to prove where you're going. And there's a need to humanize our sense of science and discovery and ideas. At some level, deep down inside, every person who's ever had a new idea, it didn't make sense to them when they first thought of it. It doesn't work that way. And so this is one of my favorite little sketches. This is a sketch that, it was Crick or Watson, I don't remember who it was, made while they were trying to figure out the structure of DNA. And this is not really a well-drawn thing. It's kind of, it's probably something that you wouldn't see in a scientific journal. It doesn't seem robust enough or complete enough. But this is what their idea looked like while they were working on it. It's a sketch drawn on a napkin. It's a very human, ordinary thing. But there's a metaphor here that allowed them to communicate with each other what they were thinking about and talk about their ideas in a way that was abstract, but in some ways maybe a lot more powerful. When you spend every day actually looking at lab results, it's all very technical, it's all very detailed, and no matter how large your brain is, you are going to look at that data from one specific representation. It's only when you go to the whiteboard or when you try to explain what you're working on to someone who knows nothing about your field. You have to explain it using different metaphors and different constructions, that you end up maybe finding a simpler way to think about the problem that allows you to have a breakthrough. And so when I look at this was something that would have been laughed at by most of the scientific community in 1941 or 45. It was in the 40s when they discovered DNA, or proved that their theory about DNA was right, that this would have made no sense to anyone. It would have been seen as a joke. And so what are you working on right now that if you show it to someone, they would think is ridiculous? Your peers would think is a joke, would think it doesn't make sense. You have to, in some sense, be the crazy guy for yourself sometimes. And if you have nothing in your journals or your lab notes that's unusual or odd or strange, then there's some burden on yourself about what are you doing to make sure you're looking at the corners, that you're experimenting and exploring your own idea space, at least in your own lab journal or your own notebook, where there's no one else who can criticize it. You're the only one who's looking at it. And so part of what I did in knowing, once I got invited to come here, I've been reading a great deal about vaccines. I've found it fascinating. And one of the things I've been looking for, though, I'm looking for these first-person accounts. I'm looking for these, where's the human story in this? Where's the guy who's at the whiteboard coming up with a crazy idea? And it took me a long time, but I finally found the hint that there's some humanity buried underneath all of the science. And so in this paper, which is about the CR6261 vaccine, who here knows what I'm talking about? Not that many of you. I'm an expert now. All right. Being an expert, by the way, is entirely relative. It's like say one thing to one group of people, you're a moron. You say it to another group of people, you're seen as an expert. But anyway, in the description for this paper, I found this little note tucked away. There's a human voice in here somewhere. The reference for how this vaccine works is actually a combination of two different possible antibodies. And the word that's used here totally just warmed my heart. Because the word, I don't know, combination, or, there's so many synonyms that could be used to explain how two different components are brought together. But the word chosen here was cocktail. Cocktail. Now, whoever put that word in there, that's the guy I want to go have lunch with and have explain to me how this vaccine works. Have them explain to me how all this stuff functions. Because that's the person who's going to see these other metaphors and other frameworks for thinking about their ideas. And that's the person who's most likely, I think, going to find some new way of thinking about the problems that they're trying to solve. So I'll be around for the morning. If I said anything that interests you at all, this is what I do for a living. And if you had questions for me or things you wished I had talked about, or maybe I offered a fact or a theory that you think is wrong, send me an email. Stop by and talk to me during the break, because I'd love to keep that kind of conversation going. And then I can write a better book and hopefully help more people develop their ideas. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the day. Thank you.